Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, first, before we get started, I want everyone with a smartphone to take out their smartphone. And I want you to look up the words Moses and the words horns. Put those two words into your search engine and show me what photographs, what pictures come up. Now, what you should be seeing, has everybody got something? You seeing sculptures or paintings or pictures of a man with a beard and horns coming out of his head, right? Show it to everybody around you. Now, why is Moses being depicted with horns? You're probably all wondering that, aren't you? And in fact, Michelangelo, maybe for some of you, Michelangelo's sculpture came up. It's this beautiful, well, Michelangelo, of course, this beautiful sculpture of Moses with these two little horns coming out of his head like he's a baby goat. And you're like, what the heck is going on here? Why is Moses depicted with horns? Well, see, here's the thing. Back in 382 to 405, during that time, a man named Jerome translated the Hebrew Bible and the Greek New Testament into the language that was widely spoken at that time, Latin. In fact, he was translating it into the common Latin, the vulgar tongue, as they used to call it. And so his translation of the Bible is called the Vulgate. So whenever you hear people talking about the Vulgate, they're talking about Jerome's translation of the Bible into Latin. And that was the standard Bible for the Western Church until fairly recently, really. And when Jerome was translating this passage, this Exodus 34, it talks about Moses coming down from Sinai. And our translations all said that something like that Moses' face shone. That's what the Bible translation that I read said. And a number of the translations you read will all say something similar to that. His face shone. Well, here's the thing about that word. The word shone, it actually comes from the Hebrew root karan, which means to grow or display horns. Now, for whatever reason, and this is one of those reasons whenever people try to get so sure about the Old Testament and the Bible and what it means, I'm always like, can you really get inside the mindset of a Hebrew speaker? Probably not. Because in their minds, why would you ever associate horns and shining? Why would you ever connect those two concepts? But for whatever reason, and it's kind of a mystery, really. It also could mean to be radiant, to be shining. Maybe because it's like horns coming out of your head. I mean, it's a little unclear as to why that was. And we don't really know why Jerome chose to translate this way, because in other texts in the Bible, he knew that that verb for horns can also mean shining. He translated it that way in some other parts. So we don't know why he chose to show Moses with horns. But nevertheless, because of that, for more than 1,000 years, that's the way Christian art depicted Moses, with horns. And of course, it's important to remember that back then, horns were not associated with the devil. Horns were associated with power and strength. So it makes sense that they would have used them to depict Moses. Only in the last few hundred years have we kind of associated horns with the devil. But so that's why he's depicted with horns. And you're going, Chris, well, that's kind of funny, right? I mean, I almost wanted to show the kids on the screen, but then I thought, you know what? I don't want them going home saying, Chris told us Moses was the devil, because unfortunately that's how some of them got mixed up. So, so I decided it was best not to do that. So it's kind of funny, but what does this have to do with anything, right? Well, the point I'm trying to make here is that we humans have a really hard time understanding the glory of God. We really do. Just like Jerome, in trying to depict it, and he ends up showing horns, In our own day and age, we have other problems with glory, and we also mix it up. We also depict it in ways that are not very helpful or healthy. And because we don't get it, we often do misguided things or even evil things in the name of our faith because we don't get it. We misunderstand. First off, glory belongs to God. It is intimately connected with God. It is part of God's very being. God is the source of glory. And not anything we do or think or say can make us have that glory. God is the creator, the redeemer, the sanctifier, the preserver, the sustainer. And consequently, God is the one with the glory. But what do we know about God and God's nature? Well, we know that God's nature is to love, right? And love requires sharing. And so when we see God and God's glory, we see that God is always sharing, even God's glory with others, just like God shares God's love. And so that's what God's nature is, to share with others, with us, with all creation. And God's glory, first of all, of course, it comes from God. And notice that Moses didn't even know that his face was shining. He was totally oblivious to it. And that is one thing, another important thing about those who have recipients of God's glory, is that they often aren't even aware of it, because they don't really see it as important. Moses was talking to God. The fact that his face was glowing doesn't seem very important in the grand scheme of things now, does it? And that's the thing about those of us who also show forth glory today, God's glory today. It's often not a big deal for them. In fact, Moses shows great humility, doesn't he? He veils his face. He hides that which is this outward sign of his relationship with God. He veils it. He doesn't glory in God's glory. Well, that's a pretty strange idea to us, isn't it? Imagine someone in this day and age veiling their face because it was glowing because they've been talking to God. No, they'd go on Oprah, they'd be on TV, they'd be on the news, they'd be making a big deal about it, and we would all be very excited about it. But we wouldn't veil our faces. But Moses, out of concern for others, covers his face. He didn't want to scare the people. He didn't want it to get into the way of his relationship with the people, of being with the people. And another aspect of God's glory is that love, that self-giving love. And I mean real love, not that selfishness masquerading as love. We all know that, don't we? We all know what that's like. Some of us might even have parents or relatives that are that way. When they say, I love you, and you kind of cringe because you know that love is not that selfless giving love. That there's another kind of fake love that some people have. But that's not the love we're talking about here. We're talking about the self-giving love. The love that puts others' needs before your own. The real love. Being with others and not over them. Being with them. And also God's glory is about justice. The prophets and Jesus and the apostles remind us of God's great concern for the most vulnerable in society. And God's glory is inextricably linked to God's sense of justice. Notice how in the Old Testament reading, it ties the glory of Moses, glory of God, glory of Moses, but what's the event here? The event is him bringing the tablets down to the people. And in fact, you don't know this because you didn't read before this, but this is actually the second time Moses brought down the tablets. You know, the first time he brought down the tablets, and he found the people worshiping the golden calf, so he smashed them to pieces. And then God punished the people for their sins, but now God has created a new set of tablets for them. So that's the context here. But so glory is associated with the law, which is associated with justice. And notice that our gospel reading for today connects Jesus tightly with Moses. Notice when you look back over that Luke text, it says that Jesus was discussing with Elijah and Moses his departure, which would happen in Jerusalem. His departure that would happen in Jerusalem. The Greek word for departure there is exodos, Exodus, which is also the Greek name, and also the English name, of the second book of the Bible, Moses. So Jesus is being very tightly connected with Moses and the law here. Again, glory is concerned with justice. Now, earlier I mentioned that we frequently misunderstand. And there is a danger about us misunderstanding God's glory. Because when we misunderstand it, when we think it's about power or strength or reputation or being important, then we end up going in very messed up directions. We end up with people like Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity and his descendants ended up imposing it on their subjects. Or we end up like Charlemagne, who around the year 800 conquered the Saxons and converted them by offering them the choice of Christianity or death. Isn't that quite a nice little choice? We Germans did get our revenge, though. He might have chopped down our sacred tree, but once a year we bring back our sacred tree, don't we? We put it in our houses right in the middle, and we remind people we are still here. We will not be forgotten. The ways of our ancestors will not disappear. But I digress. Of course, in our own history, we also have with the Native Americans and some of our interactions with them about convert or die, or convert or be made life being made difficult. And even today, some Western missionaries utilize methods that either bribe or coerce people to convert. When I was in seminary, our professor told us a story about a family in India that their family member had died. And they were Hindu, so they needed to take the body so that they could take it to the river and cremate it, as is the tradition among Hindus. But they couldn't pay the hospital bill. So the hospital would not release the body to them. Now, if they were Christians, the health care would have been free. But since they weren't, they had to pay for it. Now, the nurse did what any good, decent Christian would do, and she stole the body and gave it to the family. But I think it shows you that there's still that messed up sensibility of trying to induce people through using power. And again, this is a misunderstanding of the glory of God. Love cannot be coerced or bribed, right? You can't coerce love, you can't bribe it. It has to be this truly free, heartfelt response. And that's what the glory of God is about. And we can see this messed up understanding even today with some of our politicians and our leaders who want to return to a time when Christianity enjoyed this privileged position over people of all other faiths. Not even all Christians. Because unfortunately, often those people, they only want correctly thinking, real Christians to enjoy that privilege, which sadly I know I would not be included in that category. But again, a misunderstanding of God's glory. And the biggest example right now of someone who misunderstands God's glory is Vladimir Putin. Now, it might surprise you to hear this, but Putin's vision is a revived Holy Russian Empire that is the third Rome. This Holy Russian Empire that will be a bulwark of Christian civilization against the decadence of the West. That is Putin's vision. See what that vision is doing in the world right now. It's because he misunderstands glory, the glory of God. That it's about sharing, it's about love, it's about humility. He doesn't get it. Nor in this country as well, he has made some alliances with some members of the far right here in the United States. They also do not understand the glory of God. It's not about power, it's not about importance, it's not about respectability or privilege. It's about sharing humility, love, justice. And these people were all well-meaning, but they fundamentally didn't understand God's glory. They didn't get the self-giving love. They didn't get the humility. They didn't get the concern for justice. And they certainly missed the point, didn't they? Where God's glory comes in such a way that you're not really aware of it. Clearly they missed that part. Glory comes from closeness, from proximity to God. By being close to God. Moses was on the mountain with God for 40 days talking with God. Jesus was God's son and very close to God. Paul was a faithful disciple and apostle who had received a profound vision of Jesus Christ at work in the world. So how do we today get close to God? It's a modern challenge, isn't it? Because Jesus is not physically with us anymore. And most of us, God is not appearing to us through a theophany on Sinai or a burning bush. Most of us are not being blinded by a vision on the road to Damascus. So what are we to do? How do we get close to God? Well, the way we get close to God is we dig in. We really dig into our faith. We go to the roots. We go to the source. We avail ourselves of the means of grace, proclamation of the word, and the sacraments. Big reason for coming to church, folks. Big reason for coming to church. You also dig in through individual and communal Bible study. Like what we have at this church. In fact, talk with Jack Aker or myself. We'd really like to have more people involved in that. Plug, plug. Or like the Lenten book study at 6 o'clock on Wednesday, or 6:30 for the rest of the Lenten period. Plug, plug. These are ways that we dig in, that we grow our faith, that we get closer to God so that we might manifest that glory. There are other spiritual practices too, praying individually or in groups. There's the liturgy of the daily prayer, which I like to use. See me if you have any questions or ideas. Singing songs of praise, either alone or in groups. God doesn't care if you sing off key in the shower. Meditation and contemplation, the more reflective spiritual practices. These are ways that we can dig in our faith, get closer to God, so that we can also manifest that glory. The other way that we can do this is we can just act more like God would have us act. We can't always do that, so that's what the spiritual practices are for. But for those times that we can, we act like God would have us act. We practice sharing our time, sharing our treasure, sharing our talents with the church and with others. We practice humility, the willingness to veil our glory, to better be with others. In fact, that reminds me, when Christianity was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, one of the bishops in Jerusalem was really concerned about this, because when he had people come to him wanting to convert, he was wondering, well, are they converting because they want the benefits of being part of the state religion? Or do they really have that heartfelt desire to be part of the church? So he made it a little hard for people. He made them go through a rigorous class and go through a lot of rigmarole before he would let them be baptized. He even made sure that they hid their Christian identity, because he looked back at the passage in Matthew that says, don't do these things openly. He didn't want his followers, his parishioners, to be using their Christian faith to get ahead in this world. He wanted them to exemplify God's glory, the humility of God's glory. And we can learn from that. We can also practice self-giving love. That's sometimes the hardest one. That true, selfless, self-giving love. And lastly, we can act like God would want us to act by seeking justice, right? by doing justice, by voting for justice, by advocating for justice. These are things that we can do in our each and everyday lives. Remember that the point of what we do here in church is to transform lives, both ourselves and others. That's what we're really here for. We are here to develop proximity to God so that we might obtain some of God's glory, so that we can then turn around and share that glory with others. What is it I try to say all at the same time? Blessed to be a blessing. I know it's been a few weeks since I last said it. Obviously, I got to start saying it every week. But that's what this is all about, transforming lives, both our own and others. And if we don't understand God's glory properly, we're going to end up in the ditch. We're going to be off on a side trip somewhere. We've seen it too much in the history of this world, where Christians have fundamentally misunderstood God's glory. And unfortunately, it has led them to very dark places. There's a reason why we say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because almost everybody has good intentions. The sad truth is that often it doesn't turn out well, because there's some key piece the person is missing. In this case, it's a proper understanding of God's glory. Humility, sharing, love.